Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. In this episode, I, your host, Sarah Collins, sit down with a behavior scientist and parenting coach, Tom Dozier, to explore a topic many have never even heard of: misophonia. Tom shares his journey into the discovery of misophonia, which is an intense, often overwhelming emotional reaction to those everyday sounds like chewing, talking, or even birds chirping. We discuss what's happening in the brain with misophonia and how it differs from simple sound sensitivity, and why it's so crucial for families to recognize these signs early. Tom and I discuss current research, the lack of mainstream resources, and practical real-world strategies that we can use to support children struggling with these intense sound triggers. Tom also highlights the importance of creating supportive environments at home and the need for professional guidance when self-help strategies aren't enough. So whether you're an occupational therapist, a parent, or someone interested in understanding the hidden challenges of sensory processing, this episode sheds a light on a condition that can impact daily life in surprising ways. And he offers hope and actionable advice for those searching for answers. Thanks for being here. Now, on with the show. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. My name is Sarah Collins, and today I have with me Tom Dozier, who's going to help us to sort out a topic that I'm sure many of you have not actually heard of, the topic being misophonia. So first of all, can you start by just explaining who you are, and then we're going to dive into it?
Sure. I'm a behaviorist, behavior scientist. I'm a parenting coach, and I was introduced to misophonia 12 years ago by a mom who had this daughter that had this incurable hearing disorder that was going to ruin her life. She was going to screw up her relationships, just horrible. She was upsetting the family, but the girl had auditory, visual, and olfactory triggers. If you're getting it in through three sensory channels, it can't be a hearing defect. And
Right.
I go, this is a reflex condition of some kind. And I thought, surely we have behavior science research on reflexes. Let's see what we can do. And so I just started looking into it.
Amazing. And so what did you find? Tell us what is misophonia and where
Sure.
you've gone with from there.
So misophonia fundamentally is a condition where you hear a sound that's a typical sound, often a soft sound. Eating sounds are the most common triggers. And the person has this, I can't stand that sound. I got to get away from it. I hate that. And this very inappropriately strong emotional reaction for common sounds. And it can be chewing, it can be nose sounds, talking, consonants of the spoken sounds. It can be birds chirping or lawnmowers. It could be any repeating sound. And the reaction is just one of, I don't just dislike it. I need to get away from it. I hate that sound.
So when that happens, and a person, because I mean, you mentioned reflex, right? So this
Right.
person's reflex is triggered. What happens?
So what our research shows us, and I've actually have some videos of my granddaughter who had misophonia, is that when a person hears a sound, they don't yet have misophonia. They hear a sound, they have a thought of some that's not right, that's not fair, whatever. There's a physical reaction, and the brainstem, I like to call it the lizard brain,
Yeah.
it hears the sound and it sees the muscle tighten. And if that happens 5 times, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, then that brainstem says, I see a pattern, I can do that for you. And so then that sound actually starts to cause a muscle tension. Some people it's a big jerk, some people it's a very small jerk, even just feeling tingling on their cheeks or something, very small. But that physical sensation then starts to trigger the unpleasantness of it and the emotional conflict of it, and then it develops into an emotional reflex also. So there's a learned or an acquired physical reflex, Pavlovian conditioning, and then there's an acquired emotional reflex that is, and it's the emotions that people talk about the most. I hear that sound, I feel rage. They typically don't notice the fact they've had a little bump to their body.
At one point, a couple of years ago, because I know you've said you've heard about this 12 years ago, it was not that long ago for me. And in fact, the research that I've done since then or reading about in certain articles and things like that has all been within the past 4 or 5 years. At that point, the parent who came to me said that OT was recommended as one of the supports to help families to work through this. So, can you tell me a little bit about the current research now and what some of the supports are for families who are dealing with misophonia?
Sure. I think the number one support that you need is to add noise to your home. That if you have a box fan, a noise machine playing rain, when you add sound to the room, it reduces the sensitivity of the auditory system. It's so quiet you can hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Well, when the house is silent, you can hear every little lip sound that a person makes.
Right.
So adding sound to the room and to the child's ears even with maybe earbuds, but just make a little noise there can go a long way at helping. The other thing is you have to find someone who knows what they're doing.
Right.
Misophonia is not in any of the textbooks that are out
That's
there.
what I'm saying. I had no idea about misophonia going through
Right.
graduate school.
It's not in the textbooks. In fact, I was just working with a man who got a girlfriend who was a psychiatric intern. So she had been her MD and she did her psychiatric work. She was in her psychiatric intern and she had severe misophonia and had never heard of it. And this is this year. This is like current.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So if it's not in any of the textbooks, where is the research coming from? And how do we get this word out?
Let me give you a great website. There's 2 websites I would recommend. One is misophonia.org.
Okay.
And that actually is a shortcut to misophoniainstitute.org, which is our nonprofit. And another really great one is soquiet.org.
Okay. And we will make sure these are all linked in the show notes.
Those are two good resources for what is misophonia and how can you get some help with it. Now, there's a lot of people don't understand the physical reflex part of misophonia. For example, I was working with a 10-year-old girl. This is early on, we were just learning. And we had her laid out on a massage table in my room, and we had a recording of her little brother chewing, which was her trigger. And before it started, I said, do you have any physical reaction when you hear the trigger? She said, no, I just feel rage. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And so Mom was massaging her back, and I was playing little bitty snippets of the trigger, and we could see her shoulders jumping and her arms jumping. And afterwards, I said, did you feel anything physically? She said, oh, yeah, I felt it in my shoulders and my arms. And I said, what emotions did you have? And she said, oh, none. So what we see happen, because if you think of, for those who have heard fingernails on a chalkboard, most people say, I don't like that sound.
Yeah.
But most people shiver or cringe when they hear it. And it's the physical reaction that makes people not like fingernails on a chalkboard. So the same thing is true with misophonia. There's a physical jolt to the body, but they don't notice it because the anger comes so fast.
Yeah.
That it's perceived as an emotional regulation disorder.
Huh. So when you were working on giving her body awareness, then it helped to decrease that reflex or reaction.
Right. And it was also in a different context, and it was a very small triggers, right? So big triggers, the people with misophonia, their heads explode and all bets are off with knowing what's happened. So this was a case where we were using very small triggers to try to let her brainstem, her lizard brain, let go of the reflex. And when the reflex stops, then the anger stops and all the distress stops. So that's getting rid of that initial reflex, the best thing.
Yeah, that's so much of the work that we do with primitive reflexes as well. When we are, as an OT, when we're looking at that with families, the kind of gold star standard, and we've got a few episodes on this, guys, that I'll make sure are linked also in the show notes. But we do the opposite movement to help to train the brain to that we don't want to be, yes, in this lizard brain or in the brainstem, but then to allow our executive functioning, our sensory processing, all of these other parts of the brain to react and to be able to calm our nervous system.
And one of the real problems with misophonia triggers is that the person hears the sound, they have a physical flinch in their body, and because they've just been jabbed, they tighten that muscle. And that gives the feedback to that brainstem, that lizard brain, that it predicted
it's like
correctly.
Emergency, right?
But it predicted correctly. And so misophonia triggers tend to strengthen both physically and emotionally with normal exposure. So the worst thing you can do with misophonia is stay at the dinner table until you can't stand it anymore and then leave because you've just strengthened your misophonia. But if you can add enough noise into the room and get some laughter going and some jokes happening and riddles, and then if it's small triggers, then those triggers will start to decay. Okay. So that's a real trick. We call it counter conditioning. You were saying, get them to do the opposite. Right?
Yeah.
And so if I have a reflex of misophonia of clenching my fists, that's the initial reflex. I might also clench my shoulders and my jaw and have sweating and all kinds of other things. But if my initial reflex was clenching my fists, then if I will relax my hands and engage in something where there are small triggers, then the reflexes will start to die out. It's difficult. It is difficult. With most of the people I work with, I warn them that we're talking about a 6-month process probably to really bring this way down.
And now you mentioned that your granddaughter had it. Like, how coincidental? Or did you start doing this after your granddaughter had it?
So I started doing this because I'm fundamentally an engineer who wants to fix things. I was doing behavioral parent coaching, which you don't have a big line at your door to get help with parenting. Most parents don't go that way. And I was retired and I had the time. Now I recognize that my older daughter, my granddaughter's mother, had misophonia. She hated the sound of my jaw popping, and we would go visit. I don't want to sit by Dad. He chews too loud. So she would, and she had other triggers as well. So I recognized her. I didn't even know that my granddaughter had it at that time. But my daughter, older daughter, younger daughter, wife, brother-in-law, who I'm not related to, at a minimum in my family, all have misophonia triggers. Not to a horrible level anymore, but they all had misophonia triggers.
Interesting. Hey listeners, we're going to take a quick break from our chat, but I have something super special to share with you. If you've been loving the stories and strategies that we talk about each week, you're going to want to check out our brand new book, co-authored by me and Jackie Adrian, called A Chameleon Tale, A Colorful Sensory Story. It's the perfect resource for anyone navigating the beautiful and sometimes challenging world of sensory needs and neurodiversity with their kiddos. Our book follows Sally and Seth, two adorable chameleons on their journey to the Chameleon Cafe, highlighting how every family member's sensory experience can be unique. Not only is it gorgeously illustrated by Jackie, seriously, these chameleons are so cute. But it's also designed as a meaningful conversation tool that you can use with your child to help them recognize and express what's going on inside their bodies. Imagine having a story that you can read together where your child can say, "Hey, I feel like Seth today. I need and then list one of the compensation strategies that Seth uses. And for parents, it's a way to give your children a language to talk about their feelings and their bodies. Plus, you'll find ideas for regulation strategies to try together. The book is available for order right now. Yes, right now. You can find A Chameleon Tale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can request it at your favorite local bookstore or find it and its free book guide at homeschoolot.com/a-chameleon-tale. So support two mama authors, grow your family's emotional toolbox, and get a beautiful keepsake for your bookshelf. Order today and review it, and let's keep changing lives, one story at a time. Now, back to the episode. All right, so what would you say, what's the difference in being sensitive to some sounds and misophonia? Because if you can label all of those people, that seems like it's just a wider thing than we would even imagine.
Oh, it's very wide. The prevalence is probably 5 to 15% in the United States in adults. I've worked with probably close to 2,000 people now, and there were 3 that we figured out really didn't have misophonia. So if you have a sound, a normal occurring sound that most people don't get upset by, and it upsets you, then it's probably misophonia.
So if that doesn't affect your day-to-day life, would someone be like, what? Now, why does that even matter? Like, is there a level that's, wait a minute, I need to get some support?
So my wife had triggers for me shuffling my feet and certain eating sounds. And she has these chickens, and she came in one day and says, Tom, you've got to do something about the chickens. They're driving me crazy. So what are they doing? She said, they're squawking. I said, but they're chickens. They're supposed to do that. She says, no, they're all squawking at once, and I can't stand it. And so that had developed into a misophonia trigger for her, and it was worth addressing, or it was either address the misophonia or get rid of her pet chickens.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how much it impacts your life. But beware that it strengthens under normal experience. Right. And so if you have a child who starts complaining about dad's chewing, mother's chewing, brothers sniffing, whatever, the sooner you address that inappropriate reflex, the easier it is to get rid of. I told a young man at church about this, and what do you do, Brother Dozier? Oh, I'm a behaviorist, and I do this misophonia thing. And one of them said, oh, yeah, I can't stand the sound of my sister singing. And I said, look, if you'll just relax, if you'll just try to relax, because what's happening is it's tensing you up. I said, if you'll just try to relax, it'll be better, and it can make a difference in the long run. And about 6 months later, I saw him in the hallway at church, and I said, hey, how's that going with your sister? He says, oh, it's not a problem anymore. Because he had just relaxed rather than tensing up.
But I think if we tell our kids, just relax while dad's chewing, they're going to be like, what?
Yeah. So that's where you want to add sound to the room and make it fun and reduce the severity of the trigger. Right. Try to use the noise to make it less impactful on the person, because strong triggers strengthen with normal experience. Weak triggers in a positive environment can decay and go away.
So when does a person need to get outside assistance other than, hey, I just need to relax and I can try to tell my body to do?
You can tell within a week or two of just trying to relax, is it making a difference? If it's making it better, you're probably good. Just keep relaxing and it'll slowly decay and go away. But as you said, you can hardly tell a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old to relax when your sister is chewing.
And especially if the example that you were giving, that little girl didn't know that she was having this body reaction, that she was scrunching her shoulders, so saying relax when you don't know.
And I think I'm probably the only person that I know of that will work with children of any age. So I would happily work with parents of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. And I work by video chat mostly, telehealth, and I teach them the activities to do. And you do an activity, and is it changing? And you do another activity, is it changing? And so I had one little girl that would do cartwheels around the room while dad ate food, louder and louder food. And,
Amazing.
And her misophonia didn't completely go away, but it went down to the level that they could add a little noise at the dinner table.
Yeah.
And she wasn't triggered and everything went on fine. And it probably would It will either decay with time, or she hits
Yeah.
the teenage years and she becomes conflict oriented, and then it
Yeah.
could come back
Would
up again.
increase back up again.
Yeah.
Interesting. So have you seen that type of thing, like where at different times in life it's more of a struggle than other times?
Oh, absolutely. It usually gets a little bit better when a teenager moves away from home because they can control their environment better.
Oh, yeah.
And then they get married, they get into these relationships, have babies and crying and dirty socks
Yeah.
to wash, and life gets stressful, and
Right.
stress tends to make it increase.
Yeah.
So it waxes and wanes, and it also waxes and wanes based on what the person is doing. I worked with one family that had about a 12-year-old girl that had misophonia, kind of high moderate, and we had a few sessions, and then they went away. And so I don't know why they went away,
Yeah.
but probably because the daughter wasn't engaging. And a year later, Dad contacts me and says, "Can we meet? She's wrecking the mood in our house. She's demanding and all these negative behaviors." And so we met, and he told me about how bad her misophonia was, how severe it was. So she was actually into the mid to high severe range. And I looked at her assessment from a year before, and I thought she had the same severity at school and at home. So I said, "How is your misophonia at school?" And she said, "Oh, it's not a problem." I said, "What did you do?
Interesting.
Relax?"
Yeah.
And she said, "What else could I do?" So
Oh.
at school, she relaxed and did the relax, focus away on other things, carry on, and that can allow it to die out. But at home, because it was annoying, she fought back. So at home, it had gotten worse, and at school, it had gone away.
So in that case, the environment really made a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Huh. And do you think,
But
I
her
don't know, my
behavior,
OT brain, wait a minute here, because is that
but
also
her,
how loud it is there too?
but her response
Yeah.
to the environment, where one, she couldn't fight it, she could just do what she was supposed to do herself, and the other, at home, she was free to protest.
There's so many times that what I'm doing with families is I'm working on, is there something within the person teaching this
Sure.
relaxation and all of that? Is there something within the environment? Which I love how you've addressed that too, of, okay, let's add in some white noise or a fan, whatever, to decrease the stimulation, which I wonder if part of what was happening with her is also there's so much other talking and things at school that, at the school cafeteria, things like that you can't necessarily even hear it.
It was actually in the classroom problem. It was like sniffing
Okay.
in the classroom. So it
Yeah,
wasn't just an environmental that there was, and I usually see that, right? Kids usually have an easier time in the cafeteria than they do at home at the dinner table.
Or in a restaurant, probably,
Or
where there's
restaurant, yeah,
lots of
better.
people, that type of thing. Okay,
Right.
amazing. And then the third way that I look at things is through the occupation or what you're actually doing. So when you're working with families on misophonia, and especially if chewing is one of the triggers, do you recommend certain foods, or is that just something that would be later on that isn't
Actually, I
necessarily
don't. I try to emphasize that these sounds are normal sounds.
Okay.
Your brainstem is overreacting.
Yeah.
And it's actually tasering you. It's actually, when a person with misophonia hears a sound, muscles are being zapped, which is what happens when you get an electrical shock. So they're essentially being tasered, and they're being assaulted
yeah.
by their brainstem.
Yeah.
So I never work with trying to customize foods and things. I work much more with noise and bringing the child slowly back. So I have a case where the child stays far away from the family when they're eating, and we're in the process of bringing that child closer and closer to the dinner table.
That makes sense.
Where they can still use noise and not hear the sounds, but even just being close to these sounds is anxiety producing. Anxiety producing, and that anxiety is different than the tasering you get from hearing the sound.
Interesting. This is also fascinating. I feel like I could talk about this all day. So if there are families that are dealing with this or are now asking questions, like, again, there is a difference as far as whether it's a sound is just bothersome versus a sound is really impacting what you need and want to do, in which case you would need help. Are there questions that you recommend that parents are asking when they're looking for providers or looking for people to help them?
How many people have you helped? What method do you use?
So let me stop there for a second. So are there options of methods?
There are. Jolene Jaffe is a marriage and family therapist in California, and she doesn't recognize the physical problem. She talks
Okay.
about it's like an onion where there's a core response, and then you have judgment and frustration and anger and escape. And she works with the person to try to peel the layers of the onion off so that you have this, but you carry on. Where I go to
Interesting.
the core, trying to get rid of the
Yeah.
core. And then once the core is gone, then there's no need to work on judgment and frustration
Okay.
and escape. So yes,
Okay.
there are distinctly different ways of addressing misophonia. There's a person in New York who's published an article on it, and he works on simply tolerating it, building
Okay.
up the ability to tolerate the trigger.
Wow. Okay. So there would be a lot to decipher when you're looking for providers. So are there places that would list all of these different approaches?
Not really.
Not
You
really.
have to
Okay.
talk to each individual. What do they do? Look at some of if they have a published article or something, what are the methods they use?
Okay.
A lot of people, audiologists are probably one of the largest number of people who address misophonia, and they provide ear level sound
Hmm.
generators so that it reduces the severity of the trigger. And then
Yeah.
they try to teach the person to not react, to carry on
Right.
in those situations.
Wow. Wow. Now you have some resources that you've put out yourself, correct?
Oh, I have a large number of videos on
Okay.
misophonia.org or
Okay.
misophoniainstitute.org. Misophonia.org is the shortcut to it. And there's a video page. What is
Yeah.
misophonia?
Beautiful.
I do Saturday morning question and answer. I've just started doing that. We'll see how long it goes on, as
Oh,
long as
that's so
people
great.
show up. I did an hour and 15-minute Q&A last Saturday, and we'll
Wow.
see how many people keep coming back.
And
We'll
is
keep
that
talking
at
about misophonia.
misophonio.org as well, where people can
Actually,
find
I
that?
just sent it out on our newsletter. Send me an email to Tom at misophoniatreatment.com, and I'm happy to let you know the details.
Okay, beautiful. And we will make sure that all of this is linked in our show notes as well. Tom, just any final thoughts for our listeners here on encouragement or things that they can do, look for their kiddos that
Oh,
when they're
because
trying to support?
Sure, because this is homeschool OT, I'm talking to parents
Yes,
of where the kids may have misophonia. Parents may have misophonia too,
that's true.
but the anger, the rage, the hatred, the disgust that a person with misophonia has when they hear the trigger is a reflex reaction like sweating. It is not an evaluative choice. So try to not be offended when you get fire and brimstone from your child's mouth
Yeah,
about these sounds. The second thing is the sooner you get help, the better, because it typically increases in severity, expands to other people, other places, other sounds, and it grows. So the sooner you get help, the better. I think that's that. The
yeah,
third thing is that if your child is making your family life hell, they're suffering far worse than the family members are.
yes,
It's almost, I've never been triggered. It is hard to conceive that such a little sound can trigger this extreme, horrible, negative flood of emotions, which are completely contradictory to the core values of some sweet little
yeah.
girl that loves her mommy and daddy, but she's ready to kill them, punch them in the face.
When they chew gum, right?
So I think that's the third thing.
I think that is a beautiful thought for us too, just to remember that our kids are doing the best that they can. And so we're
Absolutely.
coming alongside of them to support them as their teammates rather than get control of this. That is a totally different outlook. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. This has been eye-opening for me, and I know will be a great resource to homeschool families.
So, Sarah, it's a pleasure. It's a very much of a pleasure to meet with you and to be able to share this. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, I want to be sure that you know about a brand new free resource video for those of you that hear the infamous words, I can't. So we often want to respond argumentatively with, yes, you can. which can backfire and spark more resistance. Instead, this video will offer practical strategies for reframing the conversation, fostering open communication, and providing the right support so your child feels empowered to take on challenges and really build that grit. So visit homeschoolot.com or click the link in the show notes to watch the free video and help you and your child navigate those I can't moments together.